Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And welcome back to Corpus Delicti podcast. We have a spooky episode tonight, or whenever you're listening. We have two scary stories about missing people.
And it's a little bit of a change in format because, like Jen said, we do have two stories. These are both a little bit shorter, but we wanted to talk about both of them because they do fit into the same theme. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in to the first one. And as Jen kind of alluded to, this one dabbles with the thought or theory of UFOs, resulting in a pilot who was never to be seen again. So this takes place October 21st, 1978 at the Moorabbin Airport in Australia, when Frederick Valentich began his flight on a rented airplane at 6 p.m. Earlier that afternoon, he got a weather report briefing and he submitted a flight plan for a night flight to King Island and then would return. So the weather was clear and calm as he took off in this Cessna 182L aircraft with 4 life jackets. He was going to head through the Bass Strait and land at King Island to pick up a crate. So after 45 minutes into the flight, Frederick's life would be forever changed.
Now, a little background on Fred. He was born on June 9th, 1958. He had dreamed of being a pilot for the Royal Australian Air Force. The bad part is that he lacked the required formal education. So instead, he joined the Royal Australian Air Force Training Corps so that he could pursue a flying career. Kind of like what we think is ROTC, maybe? He did this so he could log flying hours. Now, he was studying part-time to become a commercial airline pilot. Unfortunately, he is not very academically inclined. He had already failed all 5 commercial license examination subjects, and as recently as a month before his disappearance, he had failed 3 more commercial license subjects. So maybe he's a bad test taker, maybe he just has test anxiety, but unfortunately he could not retain the information for the exam. Not only failing these tests, he flew into a controlled area in Sydney and 2 times flew deliberately into a cloud. This resulted in an investigation for prosecution, and that was actually in the process of being investigated. And if found guilty, he could have lost his wings. He wouldn't be able to fly anymore.
So let's go back to the reason for the flight. He told one group of people that he was headed to King Island to pick up crayfish in a crate. But he had told flight officials he was headed to King Island just to pick up some friends. We don't know. One may be true, untrue, a little bit of both. So Frederick was just 20 years old when he took off on October 21st, and he had just 150 hours of airtime under his belt. His flight plan said that he was to cruise below 5,000 feet, which would put him over Cape Otway within 41 minutes, and then to King Island in 28 minutes. After that, he had enough fuel to last him 300 minutes in the air.
What we do know that is confirmed is that he flew over Cape Otway area 41 minutes into his flight and then turned to go into King Island. This puts him right on schedule. So let's break down the timeline just a little bit and get kind of an understanding of what happens. So as Lindsay said earlier, around 5:20 that afternoon, he submits his flight plan for the briefing. He gives it to the officer at the airfield. He takes off of the runway at 6:19 and he's starting to head to his destination. Now he is required to do a full report flight, which means he has to check in by radio at specific points in his flight for safety reasons because they don't want him going off trail or get lost. He has to check in because he's so new at flying. The sun sets at 6:48 p.m. and at 7:06 he starts to report trouble. He radios the operator if there's any known aircraft in the area. Now, the operator tells him, there's no traffic near you. You're the only plane in that area.
So then he radios into Melbourne Air Services again for several minutes, telling them, I see something, it's darting, it's swerving around, and he was at least 4,500 feet above the water. He reports seeing something that appeared to be green and long-shaped, traveling at a speed that he has never seen before. He says, I don't recognize this thing. It's darting around. It's moving at an obscene speed. And so at this point, he cannot identify it. He has been through flight training. So we are going to call this a UFO. And by definition, it is. A UFO is not necessarily a spaceship with little green men. It is an unidentified flying object. So on this UFO, it had 4 bright lights flying approximately 1,000 feet above him. And Frederick tells the radio operator, I'm seeing this thing and it looks like it's chasing me or trying to play some sort of game with me.
It was flying past him several times at speeds, again, that he just could not fathom how fast it was going. And then it would orbit around him and disappear without a trace. He goes on to tell the operator, Stephen Roden, that it seems to be stationary. What I'm doing right now, it's orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me. Also, it's got a green light and some sort of metallic light. It's all shiny on the outside, end quote. So he's scared.
Frederick then starts telling the radio operator that his engine is malfunctioning and acting rough, meaning it's idling and choking. Many believe that this was actually caused by the plane being inverted. So the sunset and the horizon would have, if this theory were true, have been making him disoriented, and the lights that he was seeing was actually the reflection from the water. So they're thinking maybe he just had this episode where he got confused. The plane is overturned. He's closer to the water. The lights are reflecting. But the last words that he tells the operator is that, quote, it's hovering and it's not an aircraft, end quote. Before the transmission was cut, the operator heard a metallic scraping sound before all contact was lost.
Australia begins an extensive search for Frederick and the plane. They're unable to locate him or the possible wreckage in the waters. For 5 days, they conducted a full search and rescue mission. The plane had been equipped with a radio survival beacon, but unfortunately, that beacon just could not be detected. Now, many believe Frederick is disoriented during the night flight, and the lights he was seeing was the reflection on the water. But if that were the case, wouldn't the wreckage have been found? Now, the weather was not a factor here. It was nice. It was peaceful. No strong winds. But here's the thing. 5 years later, an engine cowl flap washed ashore. This piece of the plane matched the one that Frederick had rented to fly to King Island. Serial numbers were on the same range as this plane. Could this be the last potential evidence to explain what happened to Frederick? I don't know. Do you think it's aliens, or do you think he got disoriented? What are your thoughts? What's your theory?
So one thing that jumps out to me is this piece that washed on shore. It says the serial numbers were in the same range. So we don't know if it was his or not. I find it really weird that, the man couldn't pass his commercial flying test, but he was still a pilot. He knows what a plane looks like. He's been trained. He was in the military. So he has probably seen planes that most normal average citizens did not, which sticks out to me because he was like, look, this is not a plane. This is not an aircraft. And then the weird sounds, it's definitely weird. I will not say it's aliens, but I will say it's definitely very, very weird.
It is very suspicious, but the people who make the argument that during sunset, it is very disorienting, and the idling and the coughing of the plane could have been it being inverted, so upside down, traveling with his head. If you look up, there's the water. It's very plausible that he somehow flipped his plane. But if you flip your plane, wouldn't you know?
Oh, your whole center of gravity has to be up. Again, I'm not a pilot. I don't know, but and you would probably
Feel the blood rush to your head.
That's water. You know that water doesn't look like the sky. So I don't know. That one doesn't make much sense to me at all, because I would think, I mean, when you're on a plane, at least a commercial plane, because that's the only thing I've ever ridden on, if you even so much as turn and it kind of goes to the side, that weight shifts and you can feel it. If you drop it all, if you turn, I mean, you can feel that. Again, I don't know as far as this type of plane, but to me, that just seems a little far-fetched.
There are some that believe this was a big hoax. There is a huge thread that I found that say that, he had 4 life jackets, that he was going to pick up some friends and he was going to pick up some crayfish. But the people at King Island had no clue that he was going to be there. So could he have staged this because he is going to pick up his friends some crayfish and go have a beach party somewhere and essentially steal a plane?
Interesting.
So there is that line of thought that's out there. This is just one big hoax. But how long do you let the joke go? Because now he's completely disappeared. I mean, he's in his 20s.
That's an interesting theory, though.
And also keep in mind, he was under investigation and he could have lost his license, his flying license, or his wings.
Good point.
So could this have been, I'll take this plane and Amelia Earhart it out of here and, just go live on some remote island somewhere. So there's a lot of theories out there. The most scientific one is that he crashed because he got disoriented. Some more of the conspiracy theorists think that he just took the plane and stole it and staged this. And then you have your extraterrestrial. Well, I can't remember what they call them on
extraterrestrial. Yeah.
It's a UFOologist. On Ancient Aliens, there's this gentleman who says future. I don't know, it's a term people use when they are legit studying aliens. And I wish I remembered the term because it was really cool.
Interesting. Well, this is, regardless, I do hope that he is okay, even if he felt the need to fake it. I hope that he is safe and that nothing bad happened to him, because he was a very young guy, definitely still had a lot of time in front of him. And that's really all we have as far as this story, which is why we have 2 this episode. And we are going to go ahead and jump into the next one.
All right, Delectables, welcome back. And this is the story that boggles my mind. This one takes place in 1980, Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. So we traveled on the other side of the world. And our story takes place with Granger Taylor. Now, by all accounts, Taylor was an extraordinarily smart man. He was something of a mechanical expert. Granger was from the small little fishing town of Duncan. His dad had drowned when he was just a baby, but his mother later remarried when Granger was 2, and the new stepdad brought in 3 children. At the age of 14, he built a 1-cylinder car that worked, that he could drive, and just a few years later, he restored an abandoned, decrepit steam engine train.
So he is very, very smart. Like Jen said, he's basically a mechanical engineering expert. He did drop out of school when he was in 8th grade. But even though he dropped out of school, he was putting this knowledge very much to use. So this train that he built, he had come across it in the woods. Obviously, it had just been left there, and he said, hey, I'm going to work on it. Granger did not have any official training when it came to trains or how to fix them. It was just his curiosity and how his mind worked. And he was able to fix it in 2 years. He actually takes this thing, puts it on tracks, and he would take kids on rides around it around his workshop. And he made a living out of building and restoring anything mechanical. And he's darn good at it. And he was able to sell these items then for a lot of money. Granger Taylor also loved the sky and space and everything about it. And he was able to also get his pilot's license.
Not only did he totally restore a steam engine and built a one-cylinder car, he bought an old Kitty Hawk airplane. And now it's not working at all. He was able to get it working and restore it to its full functionality. His work is so good that the plane was put in a museum for display before eventually being sold by a collector. Now, you would think, hey, he Googled how to do this, he YouTubed, he read books. No. He did this off of pictures. He looked at a picture of the plane and all the little parts of it and said, you know what, I can recreate that. I know how that works. And that's exactly what he did.
Keep in mind, they didn't even have Google or anything like that back then. But like you said, it's not even books. He's looking at pictures and he's saying, okay, this goes here and I understand how to link this and that. It's very, very impressive.
This is a quote from his good friend. Most of the stuff Granger knew was self-taught or God-given talent, or he was just a mechanical genius as far as being able to look at something, figure out how it worked, take it apart, and make it work again. But Taylor also had a little bit of a quirky side. He was fully bought in that aliens existed. He would daydream about being taken. He wanted to be able to fly in an alien spaceship. It became such a huge fantasy that he decided to put his fantasy into reality. He came up with an idea. To be fair, his whole community had bought in on this alien thing. There's a lot of alien UFO sightings in his community. There's a lot of reports in his area. One of the UFO sightings came from a local hospital where multiple nurses reported seeing a UFO outside the hospital window.
So when Jen said he decided to take this kind of fantasy idea that he had and turn it into a reality, what he did is he took scrap metal. He built his own spaceship in his backyard. And what fascinated him the most was, I am going to figure out how to make this thing fly. So all these local kids and teenagers find out about it and they're like, we'll help you out. They would help gather supplies, do what they could. And they painted a lightning bolt on the side of it. Now, it could not fly, but it was meant to replicate what he thought real alien spaceships would look like. So this more or less became his own version of a kid's treehouse. He would hang out in it. He would research in it. He would think about how real alien spaceships would be powered, how they would work. He actually put in a cast iron stove, a couch, a TV, and he was digging deep into this alien research, and it was flat out becoming an obsession.
This would engulf his life for a few years. The thought and the research into aliens and how alien spaceships work. One day he told his friends that aliens had contacted him while he was hanging out in his makeshift UFO. Now what happened was he was lying on his couch inside his UFO and he received a telepathic message from an alien who lived outside of the Milky Way. Granger had built a radio to send out radio waves to contact aliens, and this is how they were able to find him. Granger later told some friends a few days later that he was hearing voices in his head. These voices were aliens telling him that he was invited to go on to a space trip with his new alien friends. This journey would take 42 months and take him through space. The journey would begin on a very rainy night, and this way, locals in the area could not see the spaceship. So they're telling him, wait for a stormy night. That way, everyone's indoors. There's a lot of clouds. There's a lot of rain. No one's going to see us land. It's all going to be good. We'll take you up, and we're going to be gone for 42 months.
So November 28th, he takes his friends out, and he says it's a going away party before this alien journey through space. So then on the 29th, Granger goes to dinner. While he's at dinner, this huge storm hits, and this diner that he is at is called Bob's Grill, and it is storming. It's a really bad storm. It's intense. And the waitress later told police that Granger was wearing his normal clothes, jeans, logging boots, a brown knitted sweater, but he did not have an umbrella or a rain jacket. This is the same night that the local papers would report this as, quote, the storm of the century. It had gale force winds, pouring rain, lightning, thunder, you name it. And this is the last known confirmed sighting of Granger Taylor. He was just 32 years old.
But here's the little kicker to the story. Right before he went to Bob's Grill, he left a note for his parents, and he had taped it onto their bedroom door. It read, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship. As recurring dreams assured, a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe and return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I no longer will require any of these. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger."
So to add mystery to this, on the back of the note was a hand-drawn map, which some people thought was Waterloo Mountain, which was just 10 miles away. So Granger's parents, obviously, as any parent would, they panic and they call police, and a search for him begins. His stepdad searched and called all the hospitals and Granger's favorite places, trying to find him. And since this note that he left mentioned his will, they find his will and they're reading through it, hoping for some clues. On the will, they noticed that Granger had crossed out the word deceased and wrote the word departed above it. Now, interesting fact here, this change in this will, where he crossed out deceased and wrote departed, was done 6 months before. It was not done immediately before he left. So it's almost like he knew.
His parents would spend months searching, but they would not find a trace of him. The family is now desperate to find him, even sitting out the night that he was scheduled to return home from space. His brother sat out watching the sky, looking for his brother all night long, just on the whim that he had gone somewhere and that was just happened to be the night that he was going to come driving back. In March 1986, a local forestry worker found a crater on the side of the road with debris. This turned out to be a blown-out vehicle somewhere near British Columbia's Mount Prevost. This area is close to the Granger's family home. Now, Granger was familiar with dynamite, and he knew how to use it.
So the family actually, they had a lot of land and they used dynamite to blow out tree stumps. So it wasn't abnormal for there to be dynamite around. So the thing that caught their attention about this blown out vehicle is this blown out vehicle is Pepto-Bismol pink. And Granger Taylor, we know he was a little bit eccentric. He drove a Pepto-Bismol pink truck. So it was not hard to say this is his truck. There just weren't any other ones like it. So police were immediately called in to investigate. And when they came to the scene, they too noticed that the truck was completely blown apart. It's sitting in a big crater. And one of the wheels had been lodged and was still stuck in a tree high up. So authorities were able to get the identification number from the vehicle. It did belong to Granger. And pieces of Granger's shirt were also found at the scene, along with just 2 teeny tiny small bone fragments. Now, we cannot confirm that the bones belong to Granger. DNA testing was very scarce at this time, only available in certain areas, very expensive, very new. The bones have since been lost and cannot be tested, but again, keep in mind it was very small amounts too. So they're hoping that this is Granger, but is it not?
So let's talk about theories here. There's not a lot of them, but they open it up to a lot of conversation. The most prominent theory is that Granger loaded his truck down with dynamite and it either accidentally went off or he purposely set it off. Remember, gale force winds, it's raining, it's pouring. I am no dynamite expert. I have never seen it in life. I have never lit a fuse in life. Could you light a fuse in the pouring rain? What if it is so soaked? Could it blow up? Or do you think that it waited until the next day or next week to blow up?
So one part of that theory, and there is a documentary that they did in Canada that talks a little bit about this, but apparently when dynamite gets wet, it becomes very, very unstable. So that led to a theory of maybe it was accidental, and the mountain where the car was found was very, very bumpy, very, very rugged. And so they're like, maybe it was wet, it was unstable, he hit a bump, and he wasn't trying to do that. Well, then the question is, then why the heck did he have dynamite? So the school of thought there is that the dynamite was a sort of road flare of types that was supposed to be a signal to these aliens who were coming to get him and let them know where he was. Another thing that jumps out to me, though, is it's really, really bad weather, and they pick this bad weather night because they don't want anyone to see the hovercraft. But if they're going to use dynamite as road flares, wouldn't somebody see that?
I guess. I mean, you're also assuming that people are inside avoiding the weather. He's on this remote road where he thought it would be the most secluded, but no one heard the explosion.
And it wasn't that far from where his family lived either. So it was in an area where there were people. So on the flip side of that, another theory is that he was mentally ill in some way. They said that he did show signs of depression, and perhaps there was something else going on and he was in somewhat of a manic episode, and perhaps he really thought this was true, or perhaps he took his own life. Then, thrown into that, some people said, well, maybe he was on drugs. And they can confirm that he did smoke a lot of pot, but pot is not going to do this. And they have friends who said, yes, he smoked. So they wonder if maybe there was something else that could have caused hallucinations or something like that. But I mean, he believed in this so hard for so long. If he was on something, that wouldn't have lasted for years. You know what I'm saying? It's not like one bad trip lasted for years and years.
I think he did go out there believing that he was going to be picked up by aliens, and the dynamite just happened to explode, because that would have been a huge explosion. Nobody heard it. And if this is the storm of the century in that area at that time, you're not going to hear it over the wind. You're not going to hear it over the thunder.
Fair
and
point.
You have a lot of trees coming down. So it's plausible to think that this was just one big accident. And I hate that because he was such a genius. He sold that Kitty Hawk to a private collector for an insane amount of money. He was so great with kids, and he could fix anything. His mind was he just had one of those beautiful minds that you just can't just harness.
So there's two more theories, and this first one here is a little bit far-fetched, maybe a little bit on the conspiracy side, but it is that he was part of a secret government project. The government needed him to help build this elaborate stuff. They needed his mind that you were just talking about, and they couldn't give details. It was one of those, you gotta go give up your life, and they had to fake it. And the bones, since it was such small fragments, it could have been animal bones, it could have been whatever. They don't know. But then the last theory is Granger Taylor did have a friend who was a pilot, because we know that Granger was as well. And this pilot friend and Granger did do some traveling. And in fact, they had been in a plane crash together at one point, and they're lucky to have survived because it was pretty bad. So, the last theory, which ties in very much to our last story, which was unintentional, is that he took off with his friend. After his death, they took a plane and he faked his death, which is essentially what our first story, one of those theories, was as well.
Do you think him and Fred got together?
Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be wild? Fred's happened in 1978, so there's a 2-year difference.
And they're different sides of the world. But, could he have staged it, set it up to explode, but then you risk somebody hearing that, and then you and your friend take off in this airplane to go find aliens?
Anything is possible, but also with him, I hope that he's okay as well, because I don't know. I mean, his family and friends said, yeah, he definitely did have depression, but they weren't sure if he had anything else. It sounds like